So hello and welcome to the discussion about the film Corporate Accountability by Jonathan Perel. This film is a part of festival section Constellation, and I will also shortly introduce myself. My name is Petr Šafařík. I am university lecturer, journalist, and also I have a short own experience in documentary film making. I will say a few words as an introduction. If someone join us, then there are two possibilities how to ask a question or add a commentary. The first one, you can use the tool Q&A below at the screen and send us a question in a form of a text, or the second one possibility is to use the instrument raise hand, and by doing it, it would mean that you accept being recorded. This discussion is recorded and it will be placed on the website of the festival till the end, till the November the 8th, and maybe later also placed on a festival profile, probably on YouTube. So my first question for Jonathan Perel would be, the history of Argentina is not so well known in Central Europe or in Czech Republic. So please, could you shortly outline for us maybe the history of the military dictatorship between 1976 and 1983, maybe firstly in general, and secondly in your own biography, because you are, as far as I know, you are born in 1974 or you are 1976, so your first 6 years of your life you lived, also you spent it in that military dictatorship. So please.
Yeah, it's interesting to start with a little of history. This is the last dictatorship from 1976 to 1983, as you said, and it's very important that after that we managed to keep democracy since that moment. But before this dictatorship, there were many, and there were decades of going back and forth between dictatorships and democratic elections. But what the film shows, it's not only centered on repression of workers in that dictatorship, but also a few years before, because these revolutionary movements started in, you would say, 69 in Argentina, after Cuban Revolution and May 68. There was a big movement in 69, which was the Cordobazo, and that started in a way this left communist socialist movements. But there were also a few guerrilla movements at the beginning of the 60s. 65 was a big guerrilla movement in Argentina in the north that was very hardly repressed. But what the film shows is the repression of workers, mainly in the dictatorship of 76. What's different with this last dictatorship, and this is very important, is that in a way, for the first time, repression, torture, kidnapping, and disappearance of the people was systematized. You know, the previous dictatorships, this was not a real system organized to kidnap, torture, and make the bodies disappear. And this is very important about this last dictatorship, which was the hardest one. And this system of kidnapping and repression started a few years before, especially in Tucumán, in the north of the country. So my film also shows what happened in some of these factories in 72, 73, those previous years. There was a short moment from 73 to 76, which was a democratic government when Perón was back. Perón was this important president in Argentina. And when he died, this somehow allowed the militaries to take over and start this repression without limits. So that's in a way shortly the story. And what's interesting for me about the film is that we always speak in Argentina about how the militaries repress the workers, how they kidnap, torture, and make the bodies disappear. But in this film, we are showing how private companies were helping the militaries to manage this repression in different ways, sometimes handing the list of workers that were involved in union affairs to the militaries so that the militaries know who to kidnap, sometimes helping with money, with vehicles, with spaces. There were even torture spaces inside the factories, allowed by the managers and owners of the factories. So this is very new. We all know about this in Argentina, but it's difficult to discuss because these companies are still working. The owners of most of these companies are still managing the country. You know, these are big, important players in the economic of the country. So in a way, this is something that we still have to deal with this in Argentina. You know, we already discussed a lot about the involvement of the militaries. Most of them are in jail. A lot of trials are still going on. A lot of concentration camps have been transformed into museums or memorials. But the involvement of the civil population is something new. And you asked me, I was born in 1976, only a few months after the dictatorship. So of course I don't remember anything. But there's also something that it's not in the film, but what happened with all this population that was looking to the other side, because somehow the economic with the militaries was easier, more simple, more steady. So were my parents looking to the other side, knowing that there were people being tortured and kidnapped and just going along with this because the country was doing better in a way in terms of economy? So this is something that my generation is crossed. Like we were raised and born in a country that was not committed to what's going on around them, you know?
What are actually the current estimations about the numbers of victims, both in general maybe, and then among those people from the factories, from unions,
Yeah,
workers, simply?
the number, it's a very interesting question because the number is also a huge discussion here in Argentina. There is a number that everybody uses, which is 30,000 people. And everybody speaks about 30,000. It's a symbolic number. It's an estimation. We don't have 30,000 names, but the right politicians and the right parties are always questioning the number. And by questioning the number, they question the repression, they question the disappearance of the bodies, like saying if they were kidnapped, there should have been a reason. There's a way of justifying what the militaries said by questioning this number. This number is being questioned all the time now by politicians from the right parties. And there is one place that I find very interesting to answer this question, which is a memorial in Buenos Aires. It's a memorial next to the river. All the bodies, well, not all, but most of the bodies were thrown into the river to make them disappear. And only a few bodies at the beginning floated and came back to the shore. Then the militaries learned to throw the bodies deeper into the ocean and they never appeared. So this memorial is built next to the river because, you know, when a body is disappeared, it's very difficult for the family to make a mourning, a grief. You don't have a stone, you don't have a place to visit. There's no place to send, to bring flowers, you know, and that's very difficult to deal with. So the river is this massive graveyard where you can go and throw flowers to your relatives. And this memorial has all the names of the disappeared engraved in stone. And it has 30,000 pieces of stone. Each piece can be removed and put back. And there are only about 9,000 names, but it's an alive memorial. When they find a new names, they take one of the pieces out, they engrave the new name, and they put it back. And they do this every year to add new names. So this memorial has 30,000 stones, and it's being completed every year. It's alive, you know, it's very interesting.
Okay. And now let's talk about your film, Corporate Accountability. The film has a strong concept. You are filming by and your own have the camera, and you are filming factories, and you are reading from a report about those violations of human rights or crimes against humanity. So what decided for this concept?
Well, first, it's very important for me to mention that this report that I'm reading in the film, it's an official report made by the government of Argentina. It's published online at the website of the Human Rights Ministry. So it's the first time in a way that the government acknowledges what happened with these companies. And for me, it was very important that the film was close to the report, because it's not me who is deciding which companies to show in the film. I'm showing all the companies that were mentioned in the report. Of course, there were other companies that were not mentioned, but I wanted the film to show all the companies mentioned in the report. I couldn't allow myself to not shoot one of the companies, because I don't like making these decisions. It's an official report and I have to show everything. So I came up with this idea of shooting from inside the car, basically to hide myself and the camera, because I didn't have permission from these companies to do it. Maybe if I ask, some of them will tell me that I can do it, but I wouldn't get permission of the 32 companies. But in the film, I'm showing the frame of the car, and I'm being very honest and straightforward with the audience about how the image and the film was made. It's not that I'm hiding the camera and not showing the audience that this camera is hidden. I'm showing very straightforward and honest. This is the way the film was made. The camera is handheld. I'm holding the camera myself inside the car. You see the framing of the car. This framing of the car acknowledges my point of view. It's a very personal point of view. It's a mark of my position. And this is what allowed me to complete the series and to have all the factories in the film. That was very important for me to make the full scope of the report.
You mentioned some trails that it's still going on, this coming to terms with this military regime. So are there also these big companies involved, or they are not mentioned? They are not. They stay not.
There are a few
accused before trial.
No. The important trials in Argentina were basically against the militaries. In 1983, the first trials, 1984, 85, were only the main militaries at the very top. Then in 2000, around 2004, 5, 6, 7, with the Kirchner administration, the trials started again, because for many years they were suspended and the militaries were free. And these new trials are covering all the scope of the militaries, but there are only few trials against the owners of the companies. There are a few going on, but not all the companies mentioned in this report are being investigated by justice. There is one case that it's very important, which is a Ford Motor Company, because there is a sentence already. And in the sentence, a civil manager of the company has been convicted. So this is very important. It's the first time in Argentina that this happens. But I would expect much more involvement by the Justice Department, because if this is an official report written by the government, they should be investigating everything that is mentioned in this report, you know?
Do you think that your film could contribute to this, to that it will be?
Of course. Yeah. It's surprising, but films still have a way of reaching broader audiences and help and contribute to this. That's the power of cinema, of art, that it is this uncomfortable object that could reach more people, although it's not a popular film. But you know, the official report, it's 1,000 pages that nobody would read. And with the film, of course, it's only an abbreviation of the book. I'm only reading during the film like the highlighted parts of the book. Mm-hmm. But in a way, a film has this ability to put things on the agenda, to make some noise. Yes, I would expect it and be happy if the film contributes to this, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I would just like to encourage our attendees that they can ask a question, and I will repeat that the first possibility is to write a question or commentary to the tool Q&A below on the screen, or by the function raising hand. And when using this raising hand, please be aware that it means that you would agree with recording this discussion. Okay, so could you please say a few words about the reception of your film till now, because it was shown at some festivals, Berlinale, for example.
Yeah, I premiered the film in February, before the pandemic and the lockdown in Berlinale. I was there in person. I was very happy with the reception, because this film, although is telling something very local from Argentina, same thing happened in many places, not only in Latin America. You can connect this film to what happened in Europe, in the Second World War. So it was a surprise, but international audiences were very attracted to the film in the way that what the film shows connects to local histories. And then this lockdown started, and the film traveled to very nice festivals, sometimes online, sometimes in cinemas. And I was attending these Q&As online, like here, that I would have never been possible before. So I'm very happy with all this. And yeah, the critics wrote nice reviews, which I enjoy, but I don't care that much. I don't know, basically, imagine you are in Berlinale, and they have a long tradition in Germany about what the companies did during the Second World War, and there's a lot of information about the complicity of many companies with the Nazis. But still, you receive the bag of the festival, and there's a logo of a Audi motor company, and Audi was also involved with the Nazis, and they have acknowledged it. The same company has written a report, but still they are a main sponsor of Berlinale. So it's very nice to shake these things and be very cautious about the logos we include in our catalogs, in our festivals, in our sponsorships. It's very delicate. So I enjoy very much this international reception of the film.
And in Argentina itself, it hasn't been shown yet. So maybe what do you expect? Because you have mentioned some right politicians, and maybe also, or for sure, a part of mass media will probably be on the side of the big business. So what are your expectations about the reception in your country, in Argentina?
Yeah, the film was going to premiere here in April in the Festival of Buenos Aires, Bafisi. It's a very nice festival that premiere all of my films so far. And it got canceled because of the pandemic at the beginning of April. So I will now wait for next edition of the festival next April. I committed to them to keep the movie until the next edition. And I'm really looking forward to what will happen. I mean, what can they say about the film? It's based on a report that was written by the government, so they cannot forbid the film. You know, it's out there. The report is public. But yeah, it's true that these big economic companies are still ruling the country. So let's see what happens. I think the best thing that can happen is that they look back and acknowledge what happened, as companies in Europe are doing. That's a good starting point to accept what happened in the past and look for ways of repairing this, although any reparation will always be partial and not totally successful. It's the starting point to start thinking ways of repairing the damage that was made. I would expect that from the companies, not to fight against a film or a government report, but to go together with this past of ours.
And is it possible that maybe some investigative journalists or other journalists could be inspired by your film, and that they would start to question, to ask those companies about their responsibilities? Could you?
Yes, it's probable.
Is it possible?
Yeah, but I'm more interested in what real justice can do, because journalists were always writing about this. In the media, it's something that in a way is present. But I would be more interested if real judges take this and do proper investigation and because in Argentina, there are three things that we are always saying, which is memory, truth, and justice, you know, and this last pillar is what is still missing, because memory, we've managed to keep it alive for these decades. Truth also is out there, but justice, it's still a pending issue in a way. So these three pillars we've been fighting for many decades. I think we have to put some power on justice.
Yeah. And in general, film or documentaries and this coming to term with Argentinian history, is it something which is common, or let's say with also other topics which still wait for being made also in cinematography, or is something which is already, let's say, well known for the also film public? How is the situation in Argentina?
I think it's a little of both. There are a lot of films about this, and you could say a lot of things have been covered already. And by a lot, I really mean a lot of films and documentaries and also fiction films. But still there are new things to find, like this involvement of the companies, which is something in a way new for a film. But something very important for me is that the idea of coming to terms is something I would try to avoid, because for me, memory and construction of memory is always partial. It's always an open question that needs to be asked again over and over, because when we speak about memory, the ground is very unstable. You cannot step steady that this is a definite answer and we are done with this and we can turn over the page. So I would never accept this idea of coming to terms. We have to keep the process open in permanent construction. This is the way of asking new questions to every generation, you know, because every new generation needs to be moved and asked about this, but not because we are stuck with the past. It's because the present and the future we are building for the country depends on how we deal with the past. So for me, it's an ever open process that would never come to terms.
Now I will read a question from our public, from Martina. Thank you for your question. Now I quote, what about the families of the victims mentioned in the film? Did they, the families, claim justice?
Yes, of course. In Argentina, it's very interesting because in other countries, it happened differently. In Argentina, it was basically the families, the relatives, and also the survivors who asked for justice and kept the fight for memory, truth, and justice alive for many decades. The mothers of the disappeared and the sons of the disappeared are very important organizations. The work they do is extraordinary. And in Argentina, all the fight was kept alive by these blood relationships with the disappeared. In other countries, it's more the governments and the institutions that take over this. And the testimony of the relatives is difficult to come out. In Brazil, it happens this way. In Chile, in a way. In Argentina, it's the opposite way. It was first the families, and then came the government after the families. So the families are always on top in this fight.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You called the Argentinian experience local history. I'm very glad always when a film or other piece of art deals with those Latin America's dictatorships, because we really know in Czech Republic just a little about it, and I can recollect one very interesting event that in 2014, a famous American linguist and public intellectual Noam Chomsky, he visited Czech Republic, and during a discussion he compared Central and Eastern European dissidents with victims of those dictatorships in Latin America. And Noam Chomsky was also, he criticized Václav Havel, who was already as Czechoslovak president in 1990 in US American Congress. Václav Havel had a speech there, but shortly before in Salvador there was some killing of human activists, and this dictatorship was supported by United States. I know that those words by Noam Chomsky caused quite lively discussion here in Czech Republic. So I'm giving this example that that you actually don't need to call your experience as a local history, because in this context, one can see that it is important. This is a very important chapter of 20th century, and for Czech Republic, it is a quite good lesson that we should not be so much concentrated on our own history. And therefore, I ask you about the number of victims of this last military dictatorship in Argentina, because those numbers are really multiply higher than that was the case in communist Czechoslovakia. And I don't want to excuse this communist regime. I'm just giving this comparison, which also was made by Noam Chomsky.
Yeah. Well, something that it's very interesting about this process is that the influence from one country to the other, it's not only in one direction. At the beginning of, well, not at the beginning, but here in Argentina, we were influenced by how Germany dealt in terms of art and how to deal with this subject at the beginning. But then Argentina started to make their own art movements about this, and it ended influencing back to what Germany was doing in recent years. If you go to the memorial of the Berlin Wall now, it's very much influenced by art movements that happened in Argentina in the 90s. But before that, in the 80s, we were influenced by what was going on in Europe. So it's not only one direction, it goes back and forth, and this is interesting. Yeah. And as you said, the US is always behind. So that's also something to pay attention. United States is always involved in the back of all these problems.
So, and now maybe we approach to the finish of our discussion. Mm-hmm. Maybe what are your plans, or how far are you influenced now by this coronavirus experience, the coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, of course it changed my life, because in Argentina the lockdown is very strict and severe, and since the beginning of March we are not allowed to leave our houses. You know, it's been already more than 7 months. I think it's the more strict lockdown in the world and the longer one. And in terms of economic, it's being very difficult. But I don't feel this is affecting or will affect my work in the future, because making a film is always about dealing with restrictions, and the solution, the strategies you find, you create to go around the restrictions, it's what makes the film's language especially, or the film unique and special. So I know I will need to come up with new ideas and solutions and aesthetic strategies to deal with new restrictions, like I did before with other restrictions. Mm-hmm. So I don't feel any concern about how this could influence. And of course, I'm still hopeful that we will go back to something as it was before. I'm still thinking about that.
Interesting what you are saying, and I would say that this is quite nice, optimistic conclusions of our dialogue. So
yeah, right.
Thank you so much, and we are looking forward to see your next films.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.